1K Dreamer Plays.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to talk about the gear system in Seven Knights Rebirth. It is somewhat different from the old Seven Knights one, so I'm going to go through with you guys right from the basics. So how do you get gear? That will be from your raids. All three raids gives you three types of gears, which we'll talk about in detail later as to which kind of gear is better suited for what kind of hero. Okay, but take note that there are different types of main stats you can get. So this chart over here focuses on 4-star, 5-star and 6-star gear. One good thing that we know from this game is that there is no range of values in terms of the stat that you can get. So that's a really good thing. It reduces somewhat the RNG, so you won't be comparing between, you know, among your 6-star gears, you won't be comparing if there's a higher number of attack on a certain piece or a lower number of attack. Okay, there's no such thing. So the main concern is really simply what stats you have and not how much of the stat you have. So based on this chart, you can see that for weapons, you are mainly gonna be having attack related main stats, whereas for armor, you're gonna get defense related main stats. So the best offensive stat that you can get on an armor will be the attack percent. Okay, you will not be able to get crit rate, crit damage, weakness rate and effect hit rate on your armor's main stat. Whereas on the other hand, on your weapon, you will not be getting any block rate, reduced damage taken and no effect resist. Okay, so these are some things you want to keep in mind when you are trying to piece together the best gears for your hero. So to enhance your gear, you need to use gold to get more substats on your gears. Every +3 enhancement gives you 1 substat and you can have a total of 4 substats on each piece of gear. 4-star gears will go up to +9, 5-stars will go up to +12 and 6-stars will go up to +15. Enhancement is a very gold consuming situation and process, okay, thanks to the RNG involved in enhancing. So hopefully this can be adjusted because it's really painful. So let's move on to substats. So I think you guys already know substats are random and they are not repetitive. These are all the substat values, and here you can see that speed is only as a substat value itself. And all the substats can appear on either weapons or armors. There is no separation. The only separation and the differences are the tiers. Okay, in terms of a 3-star gear to a 6-star gear, there's definitely going to be a range of values that will be different. So one thing to note is that different tiers of gears, for example 4-star gears, 5-star gears and 6-star gears, have a different chance of getting different number of substats at default. For example, 4-star gears will have a 50-50 chance of giving you a 1 substat piece or a 2 substat piece. 5-star gears will have a 30% chance of giving you a 3 substat piece or a 70% chance to give you a 2 substat piece. And a 6-star gear will have a 5% chance to give you a 4 substat piece, 25% chance to give you a 3 substat piece, and a 70% chance to give you a 2 substat piece. So why does having substats at default matter so much? Because remember that every enhancement +3 gives you an additional substat. Now what happens after you have 4 maximum substats? After the 4th substat, subsequent enhancements will help to enhance the present substats available. Okay, for example, if you already have 4 substats and there's still some enhancements to go, your next enhancement at +9 will actually enhance randomly one of the 4 substats you already have. Okay, and if you are lucky, you can actually enhance the same substats a few times, and each enhancement will actually be the same substat value. So basically, if you look at this piece of Rachel gear I have, for example, the weakness rate here is 12%. Take note that for every 5-star gear, the weakness rate you can get is 4%. So upon enhancing it twice, it is actually 4 + 4 + 4, which is 12. So think about it, if you are lucky enough, you can actually double, triple or quadruple your speed on a certain piece of gear if you are really lucky, and that is a lot of RNG related. Okay, so you can also check the amount of substats your gear has at default looking at the number of dots. So obviously 3 dots will mean that this gear has 3 substats at default, and this makes it a higher grade gear compared to the one with 2 substats. And yes, that's basically what you need to know for the substat and main stat system. The other additional thing that you need to know regarding gears is called Ultimate Enhancement. And in Ultimate Enhancement, you basically have to sacrifice 6-star units to actually open and unlock additional gear slots for your existing heroes, and this will of course give your heroes more stats. So one biggest difference between the current 7 Knights Rebirth and the old 7 Knights is that there is a presence of gear sets. In the past, we didn't really have gear sets early on until much later after the reboot, right? And not only are there gear sets, there's also 7 Knights equipment, which kind of offers the same gear set effect, but they do have fixed substats available for you. So obviously this makes it much better. So I will try my best to guide you through on the recommended gear sets for particular heroes, but of course it is not limited to just these heroes. So we have 9 types of gear sets as mentioned, and the first one is the Vanguard Set. It gives attack increase, okay? 15% for 2-piece and 35% for 4-piece. So personally, I feel that the attack set is a very generic set. It can be used for any hero, but of course the question is, will it suit every hero? I think it will definitely be usable on farming and damage over time units, okay? And it could be pretty much PvP oriented in the long run. But early game, I think it is still usable for DPS units. Of course, there will be better sets we will talk about later. But if you are really, having problem getting other types of sets together, or you are just having some crappy substats rolled on the other sets, and your attack set just happens to be the best, then I mean, why not, right? It still works. As long as you have more damage, it still works. And of course, the heroes that you see here, they are not just limited to these heroes. These are just some examples of potential heroes which I think will benefit most from the attack set itself. And you realize that as we move on, the attack set doesn't seem so niche, okay, in terms of catering to specific heroes. The next one that you get from Destroyer Gaze will be the Weakness Hit Rate Increase. So this one definitely has a lot of potential use, especially for the DPS units that you are using in raids. The current roster of units, however, I have to say that they are not mostly the weakness attack oriented, which is why I feel that this set will benefit most at the current state, because you simply don't have weakness attack rate buffers. And when you deal a weakness attack, it means an instant 30% more damage. Okay, just keep that in mind, keep this number in mind, 30% more damage whenever a weakness attack lands. And this used to be the go-to set for DPS units in 7x1. Okay, one unit you will need to look at will be Ruri, because she is weakness hit oriented. Every time she lands a weakness hit, she deals additional damage. So this is definitely catered for Ruri. I believe weakness attack also still retains the same formula and effect that it will target the enemy with the lowest HP. So in that case, I would think that it is also a very PvP oriented use, and possibly used on heroes like Vanessa and Dylan's, who have single target attacks. Dylan's especially, he has a single target attack that can activate again when he kills an enemy, so that is going to be very useful if you use Dylan's in a PvP oriented setting, and this can be a potential choice of gear set. The last gear set that you can get from the Destroyer Gaze is the HP gear set, and as you can see, I've listed a lot of heroes. I generally find that HP gears are good for support units, and even more so for units scaling with HP for damage or heals. So in particular, this will be your Rook, Lina and Alice. Lina and Alice heals based on their own HP, max HP, so you definitely want a lot of HP on them. And then for Rook, he actually deals damage based on his HP as well. And as for all the other HP users, they are all support units, which will just basically help prolong their life in PvE. Moving on, we have the 3 sets that you can get from the Ox King. The first one is the Block set. So just to explain what Block does, Block effectively halves all your damage coming in, and it also nullifies critical damage if the incoming attack is supposed to be a critical hit. Okay, so it is actually a very powerful set that can be used very generically, and it is also used to be the best PvP armors that we can have in the heyday, and also a very valued stat as well in 7 Knights 2. So going by that, I think in 7 Knights Rebirth, it should also play a very big role in PvP. Okay, so listed here are most of the heroes that are used in PvP, and of course if you have heroes that are used both in PvP and PvE, you know, it is also possible that you can use block sets on them like Charon. I know you won't be using Charon in PvP, you know, few months down the road, but if you are still using support units or healers in your PvP, then you can potentially use this gear set if you do have extras. The next is defense gears, and I would say they are mainly for defense scaling units, which is going to be Rudy, Chancellor, Aragon, Helena, and Evan. Lucy is a special case. She's actually a healer based off defense, so please do not get this wrong and give her HP gear because you think that she's a support, but she actually heals off defense, so she's actually a unique case that I need to mention. The last gear set that you can get from the Octane is the crit rate. So again, for crit rate, you would think that it mainly matters for PvE, DPS, and PvP damage dealers, but if you look at the skill sets of the current PvE DPSs like Shane, Espada, and Pascal, they all have self buff in crit rate, even Jupi. Okay, but if you are not confident that they can crit, you can still give them the set, no problem. But in future, you know, we are definitely going to have more ways to push crit rate to a high value, so the longevity of crit rate gears in the long run is going to be questionable. And as you know, you need to unequip gear, you need to pay gold. So I mean, if gold is not going to be an issue in future, sure, okay, but gold, it seems to be an issue for many players right now, so just take note of this, okay. And it could end up being a PvP type of gear for certain units that to allow them to do more damage, do more consistent damage, okay, possibly in that case. Special mention to Valika because she is a crit based unit. If you remember how I described Ruri, she is basically the crit version of Ruri. So when she deals a crit attack, she actually deals more damage. So the last 3 sets of gears are from the very challenging Iron Devourer. The first is the damage dealt gear, and this is clearly a PvE gear, and I think this will be a PvE set that you want to keep in the long run, because in future, think about it, if your team, your support units, they will definitely be releasing support units that will be pushing again your crit rate and weakness rate to very high levels, near 100%, and in future we are gonna have jewels as well. You have your pets buffs as well. You know, when you add all these together and crit rate and weakness rate can get up to 100%, what's left? You know, you can only rely on increasing your damage, and this is also a very generic and neutral kind of set that you will be able to use for all whatever DPS you're gonna get in future. And I think even now it is still possibly useful. Okay, just make sure that you really build up your DPS units. And in future, if you have extra of this set, you can even give it to sub DPSs in the team, such as Ace, Rachel. I think they can also benefit from this gear and allow you to clear bosses much faster. The next one is a very niche set applying to a smaller group of heroes, and that is your effect hit and effect probability. So many of you who have not played Epic 7 will not be used to seeing this, and you may think that don't they, you know, just look the same? Aren't they the same thing? But let me tell you, no. And let me just explain what these two things mean. So effect probability refers to the possibility of you even landing the debuff on the enemy. So this is very, you know, easy to understand. So if you have a 50% chance to stun, then you either have a 50% chance not to stun, or you just stun, right? So the thing comes in here, you have a 50% chance to stun. However, there is another factor coming into play, and that is effect hit rate. Whether your effect, which is this stun, whether it will affect the enemy or whether it will be resisted. When I read this, I thought about all the, you know, things that we had in 7 Knights 1 before, which is boosting stun resistance, specific CC resistance, you know, traits. I'm not sure if Korea has traits, but in future we may get traits for each hero where you can adjust the resistance for particular effects. Yeah, and I think this is where this comes in. So this gear set definitely is geared towards heroes like Eileen, Spike, Chris, Dylan's, those that require you to actually land debuffs on the enemy in order for them to be good. And of course you have heroes like Yushin and Nox that actually buff the capabilities of these effect teams. And of course we have the Queen Rosie herself. This is the only L++ that I put in the video because I think they are all beyond reach right now. And then we have the last set that is the opposite of the effect hit rate, which is effect resist. And I think it is also a very generic set, but due to the layers of RNG and effects to hit, this could be potentially very strong if the meta shifts towards a debuff oriented meta. But for now I think it's not something worth building, because the meta now is just very vanilla, and you just everything will change very quickly as time goes by. It does effectively cancel out the effect hit gear if you realize the percentages are the same, but the opportunity cost is also quite big, because if giving your heroes this particular set just to counter the effect team, it leaves them with lesser stats overall. Okay, so now that we have covered the main gear sets for particular heroes, you might be wondering, is there any substat recommendations? So let's start off with a very simple guideline. Remember that I said certain heroes scale off certain stats, and of course if you are already gearing these heroes with particular gear sets, then of course your substats will also want to reinforce that particular stat. So for example, here we have Lena. She scales off HP, so you definitely need HP percent on her. And then whereas for the other three substats, okay, you will want to go for more defensive oriented substats. Of course, this is very hard to control, so try your best to give as close to defensive oriented substats as possible. And in fact, if you're using her in PvP, which some people do, you might want to have speed as well. Same goes for Evan. However, he scales off defense, so you definitely want some defense. I'm a bit on the fence whether you should actually have a flat stat HP and defense on such units, because I mean ultimately it does still add a little bit to whatever that they are doing. Or you could actually look at other stats like block rate or effect resist, depending on where you are using them. Then we have another group of heroes which I will call the sub DPSs. These heroes, they are kind of like support. Sometimes you have them on the front line, but they can also perform in the back line when needed to if you have even more support necessary. So I think for them, the substats are a little bit more flexible in terms of, they can also have some offense-oriented substats, they can also have some defense-oriented substats, and of course, if you're using them in PvP, you definitely need speed on their pieces. And then we have the primary DPS. So this group of heroes are the most important in your gameplay. Okay, currently we have 3 primary DPSs, and I would suggest you go full on offensive with them. Again, this is very hard to control, so give as much as you can. I think even 3 out of 4 will be definitely usable. Okay, and even if you get a flat attack stat somewhere in here, I don't think it's that bad, okay, given the chances of getting 4 straight offensive oriented substats. Next up we have the support. So they are the complete opposites of the primary DPS. They will all go fully defensive oriented substats. I put effect resist / HP, flat HP / flat defense, because I'm not sure where you will be using them. Usually you will be using them in your raids, and the raid bosses, sometimes they do have 100% effect hit rate, so you may need some effect resist to resist against their hit rates. But of course you do have immunity units as well, so perhaps going for flat stats to boost their bulk a bit more so that they live longer will be good as well. And the last group of heroes which I can think of are the debuffers. So these are primarily PvP units. So you definitely need 2 fixed substats on your gears with no doubt. That is effect hit rate and speed. Effect hit rate is primarily used to counter against the enemy's effect resistance if they have any, okay, or yeah, just basically to ensure that you have a higher chance of landing the debuff. And speed, of course, for you to go first so you can actually land debuff early, right? And beyond that, I think the other 2 substats you want to have on their gears could be more defensive based, because ultimately they are units that are doing damage. If you're using a dev team, then you don't really rely on much damage, but you definitely want to have the bulk to survive long enough. But generally, I think the other two substats do not matter as much. Okay, these two, once you have effect hit rate and speed, then you definitely know that this piece will be good for a debuffer. So that's all I have for this video. I hope it helped in explaining the gear system and also sharing the thought processes behind gearing certain heroes so that you can actually gear your heroes with better ease. If it did, do give it a like and subscribe to my channel. This will be my last video for a while because I'll be going away for 2 weeks. So thank you so much and see you!